All right. Well, let's get in here. Thank you so much
Okay.
for taking a minute out today. It's great to meet you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, as you know, my first question is always the COVID question because it was such a pivotal time for all of us. How did you get through that COVID era, and how has it changed the way that you live and work today?
Sure. I was living in Manhattan when they closed down the city. In fact, my husband and I had gone to a sold out concert at the Garden only a few days before.
Yeah.
And I have to say, New Yorkers are really good in a crisis. So while there was, a lot of confusion and fear around what's happening, do we really understand what's happening? There was also a lot of empathy and a lot of appreciation for first responders. We opened our windows and doors at 7 o'clock at night and banged on our pots. We cheered people on. The early days of the pandemic, before things got politicized, before, basic science was being questioned, it was really kind of everybody pulling together and being concerned about, their neighbors dying and their neighbors getting food and being safe and that sort of thing. I personally was safe. My husband and I, between us, we have 5 kids and 5 grandchildren, and only one, my youngest son, was living alone. He was in Chicago, and that was very difficult. And he was just finishing up a graduate program. On Mother's Day weekend, we were supposed to go out for the graduation and the, celebration of Mother's Day. And of course, that didn't happen. My sister was supposed to get married in London. That didn't happen. So we just kind of hunkered down, and it was a very quiet time. I like to say that, the internet kept the world sane. If the internet had crashed, I think
Yeah.
it would have really been a very difficult situation. And I mean, I've been retired for a long time, but my husband was working, and so the whole introduction of Zoom and the person he was consulting for was like, "Do not come into the office, do not come see me." And so then it was like, well, if I don't have to go into the office, do I have to be in Manhattan? Can we go to Florida? And so we had a little bit of movement after a while. But yeah, so the introduction of Zoom was a big change in terms of interacting with people both socially and professionally.
Everything's more magnanimous in New York. And I
Mhm.
think about what you're saying about the reaction because with doing jazz, I talked to a lot of musicians during that time. And I can't help but think that 9/11 was kind of the precursor, the one thing in our lifetime timeline. I'm a Gen Xer that was a big and it happened there and that was the epicenter. So I think New Yorkers, because everything's bigger and better there, whether it's really, really good or really, really bad, New Yorkers tend to be prepared in a very different way for
Yeah, I mean,
things.
we have a bad, there's a bad reputation, but if you've ever been in New York in a crisis, or if you've ever needed help, you're kind of overwhelmed by how people pitch in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about 9/11 because that's where my story starts. But it's not just 9/11, it's blackouts, it's floods. There's a lot of different things that have happened in the city.
Well, let's peel back the layers and let's begin with what you're doing right now. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of kids. It's career day. You're in a school. They're young, 12, 13 years old, and they just want to know what you do for a living. And
Sure.
maybe they want to know what you did previously when you were in New York. How do you answer those kids?
Yeah. Well, I am an author living in Florida, and in my prior life, I was a banker living in New York. I worked for JPMorgan, and this might be a little bit above a 12-year-old, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I was responsible for lending money to the big Wall Street firms. And my sort of claim to fame is that I made the final margin call on Lehman Brothers before they filed for bankruptcy and triggered the Great Recession. And so I have written a memoir about that period of my life. It starts in the morning of 9/11 when I was in downtown Manhattan, 4 blocks to the east of the Trade Center. And it goes through the financial crisis in 2008. And not only was that a tumultuous time in my professional life, but it was also a very difficult time in my personal life. My father got dementia, and my sisters and I had to take care of him, and then he passed away, and then my mother got cancer, and then she passed away 3 weeks before Bear Stearns blew up, which was another one of my stellar clients. And then my marriage fell apart in tandem with the financial crisis. So it was a lot to process and untangle.
Wow. So you probably lived like 20 lifetimes in that, right? That's crazy.
I did. It was a lot, and it took a lot to. It took me 15 years to write this book. And now, admittedly, four of them, I walked away from it for 4 years, but uh, it took that amount of time because I really needed to process what had happened to me. Initially, I just wanted to put my head in the sand and, hide. And I had a friend, he was an author and historian, the late Christopher P. Moore, and he kept telling me I had a story. He said, you were downtown on 9/11 in 2001, and in 2008, on that same day, you made this momentous $5 billion margin call on Lehman Brothers, and there's a story. And I said, I'm traumatized by my story. I don't want to talk about my story. I don't want to
Yeah.
tell anybody my story. And so it took a little while. He interviewed me for a play that he was writing about 9/11, and that sort of opened up the floodgates, and I realized I had, all this toxicity inside of me, and I needed to get it out. And so I started writing, but I really didn't know if I could write about my life. And so I started taking classes with Gotham writers in New York, and they had this Friday night program when I was newly single, and you pay $20 and you go and they give you a prompt and you write for 15 minutes, and then if you want you can share with the group. And since it's Friday night, there's only positive feedback allowed. No criticism. And so I said to myself, all right, whatever the prompt is, I'm going to write something true about my life. And I did do that, but I always referred to myself in the third person, and I always referred to myself as she. Sort of that's how distant I was from my own experience and being comfortable with talking about myself. So now I have this highly personal first person narrative out there in the world, and it's been a big evolution.
So obviously, to relive your story well, you're going to be traumatized. You have to go back into that mental chamber. But ultimately, now that the story is out, is there a cathartic wash? Is there a level of you that's been kind of Phoenix rising?
Yeah, it's really been liberating to finally be finished and have the story out there. But I think the Phoenix Rising happened first. In
Right.
other words, I had to do the therapy, I had to do the personal development, I had to figure out, I had to get comfortable with all of that. I had to get comfortable, I had to gather the courage to tell myself the truth, and then another level of courage to go and make that public. And so uh, that that inner work liberated me and gave me the capacity to tell my story and to sort of let go of the guilt and the shame and the PTSD and share it for the benefit of other people. I mean, I did come to realize and appreciate that because of my job, I had this unique vantage point to these historic events that not a lot of people had, and an even fewer number of women, and even a fewer number of mothers. And so I knew I didn't want to write a business book. There are other people who are much more qualified to do that. And so it was my personal story, which I tried to only tell my personal professional story. And that just didn't cut it. I mean, one thing I learned about I took a lot of classes along the way, and one thing I learned about memoir is while it's not autobiography, it is the full emotional story of whatever sliver of your life you're telling. And so I had to go there for some things that were very uncomfortable for me. And But I'm glad I did because readers are really resonating with the emotional transparency, and so that makes it worth it.
So before you became a success with JP Morgan,
Mm.
you were 13 at Career Day. What was your dream gig? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I went to college and studied social work. So I had two things. One was I was a piano player, and so I would have liked to, pursue that. And then also I started I was like a camp counselor for developmentally disabled children when I was a young teenager, and so I always had that sort of helping gene.
My son's on the spectrum, so I always respect and admire. So you had to have seen another side of life being a part of that world for a little
Hmm.
while, huh? Like
Yeah.
an eye opener, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went out of college. I was a social worker in foster care. And so I went to a women's college and then I worked in social work, which was predominantly female. And then I left that on a Friday. And on, the Tuesday after Columbus Day weekend, I walked into a bank and an entry level job. And it was like, I was like, I'm ready for this big bad world, but I wasn't really ready for the machismo, a certain amount of mediocrity, a large amount of alcohol, alcoholism. And so it was a real culture shock. It was a real culture shock.
So you've had to be pretty strong through all of these trials and tribulations you've lived through. Take me back to your younger years. What were the seeds that were planted that gave you this level of grit, resilience, existing in this male world,
Mhm.
male-dominated world, and being a
Mhm.
success? How did all of this become a part of who you are?
Well, I was the youngest of three girls. My father was a very successful businessman, self-made businessman, very charismatic, very strong-willed, very difficult sometimes, a little, bordering on narcissistic, and um, very strong Protestant work ethic. We were raised, pretty strict Presbyterians. And so there was, in the, idle hands, devil's work type of mindset. I can remember when I quit the lacrosse team, the lecture that I got for being a quitter, So I had a very strong, work ethic intoned in me. And we always said we were fortunate that we didn't have brothers because, my father, he really favored our male cousins. But because we didn't have brothers, we had to do everything, so we had to cut the lawn and we had to do all the different chores, not just the female chores. And so there was that. And then the neighborhood I grew up in, the kids were all boys. So I grew up, even though I had sisters, only I didn't have any brothers. I did have a lot of boys that I used to roughhouse with when I was a kid, beat up if I could.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got to go back to that COVID question. What was the sold out show that you were at?
We were at the Brothers concert, the sort of the 50th reunion of the Allman
Oh,
Brothers. So
wow.
Derek Trucks and that whole crowd,
Okay.
Warren Haynes. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay, very cool.
yeah.
Another piece in New York, tree. So I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, Italy on the morning of 9/11. And there was a
Mm.
guy that just kept saying Nuevo York and kept shooting his hands in the air. And I landed in Paris on the 4th of September. I was backpacking, just went to Europe, and I never really contacted home, didn't look at the news. I just shut it all off. So when that happened, I was like, what's going on? Because my dad was born in Brooklyn, raised in Long
Mm.
Island. So there was a New York connection. And I went back to the hotel and he's telling me what's going on. So my question to you is, and I don't know if I've ever asked anybody this, and I've asked a lot of people about this day. Did you hear the first plane? Did you have any idea when it was unfolding that it was like nefarious? What
Yeah, so I was sitting at my desk on the 21st floor of Chase Manhattan Plaza, which I said was four blocks to the east of the Trade Center, and I was on the phone with my sister, and I heard a loud bang, and the building shook, and I said that is not right. And so I got off the phone. I went to see my boss, who was in the office next to me, and he said they're saying on the news that a commuter jet flew into the Trade Center. So I went down to the other hallway to see if I could see it, but there was a building in the way. I couldn't see it, but I could see uh, lots of debris in the air. So I thought, well, maybe there had been a bombing, like there had been a bombing at the Trade Center in 93.
Yes.
Um, so I came back down to talk to my boss again, and then some of our colleagues who commute through the Trade Center came in and they said, "Oh no, we saw it hit. That was a jetliner." So we were kind of talking to them and, sort of trying to process and figure out. And then the second plane hit, and my department head came running out and he said, "That's no accident. Get out of the building."
Yeah.
But the loudspeaker was telling us that we're not evacuating. And
Wow.
I am claustrophobic, so I was not getting in a crowded elevator. So some people left, some people stayed. I stayed. And then a little bit later, I said, let me go downstairs and see what's going on. So I went downstairs and I went onto the plaza and I could see the second tower on fire and I could see uh, where my clients' offices were. And there were papers at my feet and I could read them and they were, singed or whatever, but they were financial statements from Cantor Fitzgerald, which was at the Trade Center and was one of my clients. And so it was quite uh, disorienting.
Yeah.
And then a colleague of mine came back from a meeting and we went back into the building because it wasn't being. So fortunately, we were inside when the towers fell, which a number of friends and colleagues were not. So it was pretty horrendous for the people that were stuck outside. And as I said, our responsibility was funding Wall Street, basically moving cash and securities so that they could close their books every day. And so our phones were ringing off the hook because there was so much confusion going on. And our one of our main competitors was completely out of commission and their backup center didn't work. We had people calling from uptown wondering where, if we knew where people were. It was a lot of chaos. We got evacuated at about noon. Somebody came to take us downstairs. He was completely covered in dust. Obviously, had been outside during when the towers fell. But I, I didn't understand. I was like, I don't know why he looks like that.
Yeah.
It just was so much was happening so quickly, and so we went downstairs and we decided we decided it was still a work day and we better go uptown and find out what's happening. And so we left the building and it was like organized chaos. So it was sort of like it was almost like it had snowed, like there was debris everywhere, everything was coated and it kind of had that quiet muffled
Yeah.
sound. But then there were also first responders, passing out water and masks and telling us where to go and walk. And so, so we walked uptown, and I stopped at on the East 20s at Credit Suisse First Boston, one of my clients, because I had been on the phone with them and I was like, I got to find out what's going on. I need a phone. So I talked my way into that building because, of course, they weren't letting anybody in the building that didn't have an ID. But I talked my way in. I found somebody that vouched for me. And so then I got on the phone and I was able to connect with my family at home and also with colleagues that were downtown in a different building. And then I found out that my department head was up at the world headquarters at 270 Park Avenue. So eventually I walked up there as well. And then, we were told basically by, President of the United States, the president of the bank, all the powers that be, like, keep doing what you're doing. We cannot have the financial system collapse. You need to continue financing and funding and moving securities to the best of your ability. So there were a lot of decisions made that day in order to do that, that were difficult to took over a year to untangle. For
Yeah.
instance, normally we have instructions from clients to do things. Well, we just did them without the instructions or with only half of the instructions. And then we're like, well, we'll figure it out tomorrow, who these securities belong to, where the money goes to. So it was very chaotic. And we went right back to work the next day,
Wow,
but
that's
not downtown. We worked in Midtown for about 3 weeks until we were allowed to go back downtown. And I one of the scenes in my book is taking the subway back downtown that first time and going under the Trade Center and the ash pit still smelling and all of that. Yeah.
so I'm curious on this adventure, the ups and downs that you've been through. I'm curious if you had a dream tonight and you ran into the 18-year-old version of you, ready to go out into the world, and you walked in the room and there was a film projector and you click play. 60-second highlight reel of your life comes up on the wall. Is that young version of you going to believe that your life turned out this way?
Yeah, well, she'd be happy that I made it to here.
Yeah,
She might not be so happy with some of the
right.
data points in between, but yeah, right now I said, if I can make it back to that 5-year-old, I'm in good shape.
Uh-huh. For sure. What's the advice that you would give that 18-year-old version of you?
Hmm. Somebody else asked me that recently. I'd say I answered it. I said more confidence and less certainty.
Wow, that's wise. That's deep. That's really deep. So, what's the highlight in that reel of your life? What are you the proudest of? What stands out?
Um, well, I mean, obviously, of course, I'm proud of my children,
Sure.
but in terms of my own personal self, I am proudest of sort of discovering my true self and being willing to live that person in the world. And so I spent a lot of my life, uh, one, with guilt and shame and denial. And I also, maybe these go hand in hand, spent a lot of my life dependent on external validation. And so sort of coming to rock bottom at the end of the period that's described in my book, I really had to go within and I really had to rediscover myself and I had to learn how to stand in support of myself, to change my inner monologue to more supportive language and to sort of put my internal validation into right relationship with my external validation.
So, after all of this time, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, clients, former employees, everyone that gets your book, and all these little bubbles and Venn diagrams. But you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Mm. Well, I know I'm strong. A lot of people say that. They used to say to me I was intimidating, and I always laugh because internally I felt so insecure. But I give off that. I don't know, maybe it's my Scorpio rising or something, but I give off this I give off this very, very this strong face. Um, Yeah, I'm a good-hearted person. I really, I try to do my best. I try to see the best in others. I try not to be Pollyannish about that. So I'm not afraid of, and I think I was for a long time, but I am not afraid of facing the shadow self. I think I have learned that all the voices need to be heard, and they're trying to get our attention and tell us something helpful. Um, even though it might feel scary.
So, if you could get into a time machine and go back into the annals of New York and go to a location, go to a year, go to an event, what would you love to
Mm,
have seen in the timeline, that rich timeline
mm,
of New York City history?
mm. Oh gosh, there's so many, I used to think, oh gosh, it'd be great to be alive in the 40s, or it would have been great to be alive in the 20s. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just so many cool errors. I mean, even, now I have, back in the day, I'll be, oh, like it's fun in the Gilded Age, but I have learned that things were a little messier. I like the
Yes.
I like the sanitary parts of New York now, not like the, horse poop in the streets and,
Yeah.
all the mud and all of that. But and even, I was telling you about my friend Chris, who's the author and historian. He really kind of personified New York because he was uh, African American, Dutch, and Native American. And
Oh,
so and he really, he was one of the people that discovered the African American burial place in downtown Manhattan. And so he really had that early part. And I really think that would be so interesting, when the Lenape were still here, when New York was really even almost pre Peter Stuyvesant, but when New York had all different races, all different countries, so many people here. It was a land of, commerce and opportunity. And it was just everybody was here and
yeah.
all types of people. And it hadn't stratified. There wasn't necessarily slavery yet. There weren't the race rebellions yet. And the Native Americans were still in the mix. They hadn't been, marginalized and pushed out. And so that's a really exciting time as well. Um, trying to, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the book, but there was a book written by a journalist about somebody who lived like for 400 years. He lived through all of the stages of New York. I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember it, but it was a
That,
really interesting
Chat
book.
GPT will know what it is.
Oh
That
yeah.
it'll
I'm
pick
a
it up.
little bit of a Luddite, so I'm not so much into AI.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. Totally. So 8 Septembers from nine
Yeah.
eleven to Lehman. If anybody
Yes.
wants a copy, if they want to have a consultation with you, any of the good business, where do they go?
Sure. I have two websites. One is janebyers.com, and that includes my consulting business, information about my book, my blog, and lots of information like that. And then I have one just dedicated to the book, which is 8septembers.com.
Okay.
Eight is spelled out. Hmm.
And I will
Yeah,
put
and the
those.
book is available anywhere books are sold. You can
Okay.
you can rent it at the library, you can download it from Amazon. You can buy it from your local bookstore or order it from your local bookstore.
What's the best letter you've gotten? Best response you've gotten?
Oh my gosh.
Or not even, I mean, it's not a fair, it's more of like what hit your heart the hardest, the
Yeah.
response you got.
Um, well, there were a couple of things that were difficult about writing the book, and one of was remembering the sequence of things because of all the PTSD coming out of 9/11 and all the chaos of if you read the book, you'll see there was a lot of chaos,
Yeah.
um, personally and professionally. And then the second was being emotionally honest.
Yeah.
And then the third was I knew I was writing for a general audience, so finding layman's terms for some esoteric financing techniques and, making the economy and bond trading and tri-party repo accessible to the general reader. And so I've been really gratified that both the emotional transparency and the financial education that is not a textbook, but is, analogies and, things like that have really resonated with people. So people have told me that they've learned from the book, that they feel maybe a little bit more empowered to, think about the economy, the country's debt, how the bonds work and all of that. Um, but probably, yeah, the because it was terrifying to publish, that the appreciation for the emotional transparency, somebody called it the generosity of truth, and I really really appreciated that because it was hard to get there.
Yeah, for sure. So I will put links in the show notes. Jane, thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with everything. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciated being your guest today.